This is about writing the first draft script. You've got your software to write this with now. You've got Screenwriters software. If you've done the work we talked about in the last action list, you will have got used to the idea of how things are laid out. You can see some of the examples that we've got on the site. Now what we want to do is start turning this thing into a script. First and most important thing is, you've got your scene headings in already. Your bullet points are going to become your actions, okay? The description of what's happening in the scenes. Really all that's left for you to start doing at this point is writing the dialogue. And this is where most people crash and burn. Okay. So what we're going to talk about here today is creating dialogue. First and most important thing of all is make it believable. We're not writing Shakespearean theatre. Okay. Even if your story is set in the 15th century, it will need to be intelligible for a modern audience as well. You've got to decide how close am I going to make this historically accurate. If it's contemporary, then you've got to look to say, right, okay, how am I going to communicate these ideas on screen? How much dialogue do I need? Straight away we get a major problem is most people override dialogue and it isn't believable. For example, great example that I had years ago was working with another writer and who was a close friend, and he'd written a really good, interesting piece of work all about a man having a breakdown who decides he's going to climb a mountain to get over his breakdown. And along the way, he recounts to his best friend what's happened to him. And it's very highly emotionally charged piece and huge screeds of dialogue. And I said to him, right, how's the actor going to do that? Because I was looking at directing this piece. And we went out to a very steep hill, and I said, right, give me the dialogue. Start, go. Within 10 yards, he couldn't speak. He was climbing a hill. It didn't work. It wasn't believable. And it was a real lesson to go, if you're going to create believable dialogue, think about the physical context that your character is delivering it in. Get up, walk around the room, sit in the chair, try it. You'd be quite surprised. Things don't work while you're opening the fridge and so make your dialogue believable. And usually one of the ways to make it believable is do less of it. Remember, this is a visual medium that we're working in. Okay? Another thing to look out for is ugly exposition. What that is when you get writers putting words into the mouth of a character in order to put a piece of information across. For example, two characters talking to each other, and one says to the other, you really must be struggling since your mum and dad were killed in that terrible car crash. It's ugly. There's no need to say it. It's enough just to say, I'm really sorry for your loss. How are you getting on? And then find a way to convey that this person's lost both their parents in some tragedy. But exposition is when people are saying things. You will see it in films all the time. It happens, and it's really ugly. And it can pull you out of the film straight away. Third thing to watch out for, sermonizing. New writers, especially guys, have a thing about doing this. I'm going to tell the world how I can fix it. I'm going to tell the world what's wrong with it. I'm going to tell the world my opinion about everything. They sermonize. Okay. Save sermons for the pulpit. Don't put them in your scripts. Again, less is always more with dialogue. Can you cut it down? The next one I'm going to talk about is something that gets people arguing all the time, falling out about it, is voiceover. Some people hate it. Some people love it. The simple fact is, these are all tools within writing. It's how you use them. One of the things to remember about using voiceover is, if you have a character doing something, don't have the voiceover telling us what he's doing. That's the worst kind of voiceover. Voiceover should add another layer of information to what's happening, or perhaps be an ironic observation about what's happening. So watch out for lazy voiceover. It's also lazy voiceover is sometimes used to fill holes in the story. I keep harking back to this, but this is visual storytelling. Find a way to do it with pictures. If you can strip out the voiceover, fantastic. Now that you're writing a script, you have to think about the structure of it. And the simplest structure, which you will have already created, is a beginning, a middle, and an end. Your bullet points should cover that. And that's known as the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure has been around forever. Once upon a time, then there's the action, they all lived happily ever after. It's the same thing. People have begun overanalyzing this thing. They pull it apart. People will tell you there's a 22-act structure, there's a 15-act structure, and more and more. It gets pulled to pieces. Okay. All you need to think about is, have I got a setup? Have I got a middle? Have I got an ending? At the moment you're making a short script. What you then need to decide is, how am I going to structure that? For example, you may choose to come in halfway through. So you shift. You start the second part of your story. You have the ending, and then you have what would have normally been the beginning to explain what you've just seen, or to make an ironic point about what you've seen. So a 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end, and then you can play with this. The next thing we need to think about is, are we going to use flashbacks, flash forwards, montages where we see a series of images to explain a sequence? These are all used in feature films. If you're going to employ these kind of things within a short film, make sure that you're not overcomplicating things. We want to be with the character. We've got a limited amount of time for you to tell your story in a short film. Beware of style over substance. And this one is a one that gets people fighting. Camera directions in stories. Now, I work as a writer and a director. And my job when I come in as a director is to figure out how we're going to tell this story and work with the writer and bring out the best way to tell a visual story. That's the simplest way to say it. What often happens is writers are falling between two stools. Some writers are frustrated directors. Some writers are intending to direct their own script, and they start to put in lots of camera angles. And the thing is, it very rarely helps. A good writer doesn't need to use camera angles. Okay, if I say in a script, we cut to a close-up on the glasses sitting beside the laptop, that, for me, as a reader, pulls me out of the story. Now I'm watching the story, I'm not in the story. All I have to do to convey the same information is to say, a smudged and dirty pair of glasses sit next to the laptop. That means I'm right in there, I'm going to see it. So try not to use camera angles. They pull you out of the story as a reader. The other thing that pulls you out of the story is we see a man sitting at a laptop. That, again, makes me into a viewer. We don't need it. Give us simple information. A man sits at a laptop, typing away. Okay, so lose the we sees. You don't need them. When it comes to writing descriptions of where your action is set, where the scene takes place, be careful of overwriting. Often what happens is people get caught up with telling us every minor detail. So, for example, if we were talking about the description of the space behind me, poor writing is when you start to tell us every detail about the place. It slows the script down. All you would need for the description of the space behind me, for example, is it's a large, open-plan, stylish loft space. It tells us all we need to know. Open plan, large, stylish. Your reader will fill in the gaps. Trust their imagination. That's all we need. Don't overwrite your descriptions. The last thing I'd like you to consider as you start writing your first draft screenplay is just make sure that we can discern the different characters. Have you got names that all end in E's? Have you got a Billy, a Mickey, and a Danny? You'd be amazed how often that happens in a script. It makes it really hard if somebody's reading a script to figure out who's the characters. Again, we talked about the power of names earlier on. Use the names to make these characters jump out. Go in and look at the dialogue that you create for your characters. Do they all sound the same? Can you take away the names and still differentiate between different characters? Listen to how people speak, and you start to pick up the different cadence and rhythms in people's voices. That's a really powerful tool. So get yourself out, sit in cafes, listen to people. Go to areas where you wouldn't normally go so you can pick up different accents. Study them. Have a look at documentaries about different areas. Maybe go back in and look at your characters and see if I actually change the location of where they come from, what would that give me?